Okay, looks like the stream is going, so we're good. Then you can take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am so happy to welcome all of you who have tuned in to this webinar. Even though I can't see you, I know that you're there, and I'm so grateful for that. And despite our distance and our small boxes, I promise you an evening of wonderful poetry and interesting conversation with Lester Graves Lennon, Natalie Graham, and Camari Carter Hawkins as we explore the intersection through poetry of justice and resilience. To get us started this evening, I wanted to share one of my favorite poems written by Clint Smith, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic, and since 2021 has hosted Crash Course's Black American History series. His powerful poem of joy and resilience is entitled, "There is a lake here." There's a lake here, a lake the size of outstretched arms. And no, not the type of arms raised in surrender. I mean the sort of arms beckoning to be held, to wrap themselves around another and to never let go. And no, the lake is not a place where people are drowning. And no, this water is not that which comes from a storm or that which turns the city into a tessellation of broken windows and spray paint. There are children swimming here, splashing one another while the droplets ricochet between them. The droplets do not hurt. They simply roll down the side of the boy's cheek. No, the boy is not using the water to hide his tears. He is laughing, eyes cast out across the water in awe of how vast it is. So that's Clint Smith, and I think a very wonderful way to start this evening. But next, I'm going to turn to introducing our first reader. And I am so pleased to introduce Lester Graves Lennon. He is the poetry editor for the journal Rosebud and the author of 3 collections of poetry, most recently Lynchings, Postcards from America. I am also pleased to publicly and for the first time thank Mr. Lennon because it was due in part to his suggestion that former Mayor Villaraigosa established the Poet Laureate post for the city of Los Angeles. So with gratitude, I turn the program to Lester Graves Lennon.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I want to thank you for the service you are providing the city of Los Angeles as its 4th Poet Laureate. You honor both the position and the city, and thank you for that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Cody Cisco and the city of West Hollywood for this event. With that, I'm not going to start with my most recent book. I'm going to start with my last book because we are in Black History Month, and I'm going to read 2 poems which encircle both the personal and our national history. So the book is My Father Was a Poet. In it, in the key pieces, there's a blind father who dies. There's a son who's a poet who discovered that his father wrote poetry in Braille but never told anyone. So he had those poems translated, and then he took 10 of them and wrote a response. So in the history of the church, in the history of Black folk, we have this call and response. So here is the first poem, which is the Father's. The Father, Part 7, King. King's call to history was clear. Washington's march demanded all, colored and white, father and son. My wife feared liquid Negro mobs would rise to torch the Capitol like Harlem back in 42. That was a time when I could see the storefronts fated to be fuel. I walked those streets to lower heat, dodging the misfired Molotovs, when young men became hooligans and crowds gave speech to buildings' flames. DC was not those Harlem nights. This pressing heat pressed for King's voice. Church folk had bussed to Bethlehem. My son will not forget, he heard, a man who in a better world would stand to speak as president. The Sun, Part 7, Mr. President. Bethesda Baptist Church chartered 2 buses. We made our only father and son journey. My mother's caution did not caution him. He grabbed my arm and off we went to see a sea neither of us had ever seen. Loudly, as always, he was asking questions. Are there more colored folks than white? Yes, Daddy. Are black and white prayer birds flying with us? That's what he called the priests and nuns. They are. You say more than 2 football fields through the stage and packed? Yes, and a lot more behind us. He smiled. I told your mother, King knows Negroes. The heat kept ringing out its entrance fees. Mahalia's song built expectations hum. The rabbi's speech closed. King began his sermon. He built each word to verse, each verse to chapter, lifting the crowd to choir of memory. The day transfixed in history, its echoes spangling the ice-lined mall 5 decades later. The summer's sweat, now frost in winter's bite, as masses form one congregation, hearing the gospel-steepened alto of Aretha, preparing for the man who walks on votes from dream into undreamed reality. Bundled in willing witness, I have my layers. A blind man slips on ice. He's near my age, my father's age, when I stood next to him, sharing the future's call we would not share. I think of how he'd smile when we first hear a colored man called Mr. President. And with that, I will move to my new book, Lynching's Postcards from America. Unfortunately, the title is quite apt because in some of the time of lynchings, there were postcards made and sent through the US mail. Postcard showing the lynching of Allen Brooks, March 10th, 1910, Dallas, Texas, photographer unknown. This is not a postcard from hell. No, this postcard has proper postcard, has proper postage. This postcard guaranteed by US mail, guaranteed safe passage, safe arrival, contents safe. Scrawled message, token of a great day, scrawled beside 1-cent Ben Franklin stamp, behind picture of teeming downtown Dallas, picture taken one Thursday, lunch hour, picture taken, old Negro hanging beneath Elk's arch, old dead Allen Brooks stripped naked, beaten dead before he hung, clothes snatched as trophies before photographer captured his photograph. They said he raped a 3-year-old girl. They said courtroom justice was too slow. They said hanging was proper work. God's work was hanging. Body dark, helpful arrow drawn to body. Crowd deep in front of camera. Two in crowd look back. They have the father and son look. Next, unknown, circa 1908, photographer, unknown. Unknown, hung body, exact date, unknown. Black body, once man hunted because black, because something black had to die, because light pole was there somewhere where rail yard light was needed for correct work, where light was useful for checking tightening noose, for useless coon, last used uselessly as next dead coon, properly hoisted to see properly, rope strung high over lights, pole's lone arm, rope stretching neck tautly, thrusting chin up, stretching head skyward, body part of pole, wool head blurry in camera's lens, railroad cars blurred, waiting cart, horseless below body, waiting like guideless ferry traveling to God, like coat, trousers, white shirt wasting on corpse, coat, useless to impress, shined shoes, slow shoes, useless, all caught, all hung, all seen, all left by all unknown who died, unknown somewhere, unknown. The lynching of Reuben Stacy, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, July 7th, 1935, photographer, unknown. And there's an epigraph. The question of race in America involves the saving of Black America's body and white America's soul. James Alden Johnson. Children, it is the children. It is children looking up. 3 girls, white girls, standing, looking. Oldest, tall, blonde, could be 14. The oldest, fingers on chin, appraising the rope's fingers, squeezing its claim, its calm insistence, squeezing breath until Reuben Stacy did not breathe. Farmer without land, without work, not farmer. Homeless, patched overalls, found hungry, homeless, hands cuffed in front. Reuben's large, handsome hands, hoisted, crowd rushing to kill, quickly hoisted, not skilled knot, not proper hangman's knot, strangling until neck gave or air cut, strangled. Seen, how much seen, how much draining life seen, life study field trip, observes lynching's life. Adults, nonchalant. Children, now adults. Only children staring at body, only them. A 4th, smaller girl stands back from them. Cute, too cute. Shirley Temple, schoolgirl, cute. And now my last poem, which is taken from the photograph on the cover. Photograph of lynching of Laura Nelson and her son, L.W. Nelson, 14, Okima, Oklahoma, March 25th, 1911. Photographer G.H. Farnham. Justice, old school, bright as day on bridge, justice. Smile, everyone, dads, mothers, children, smile. Great day for Okima, posing on Great Steel Bridge. New bridge near Darkytown. Hard steel, weight, strong steel, scores on top over dead weight. Lazy day, lazy sun, river flows lazily. Bodies 2, mother and son 14, bodies hanging, screams stopped. Who's stopped first with hanging? Rope, half-inch hemp. Sun clearly shows son's rope. Son's trousers nearly off cling to feet. Son's body twists right, head back, facing mom's body, dress plain, intact, despite jail rapes, undressings. Copyright 1911. Copyright claimed, bottom left on print, bold letters claimed. Lined on their bridge, above their trophies lined. Citizens pose for history as citizens. Laura Nelson's rope fades into print. Laura glides over water. Bleeding sun, she glides. Thank you.
Lester, that was just so tremendously moving, shocking, necessary. I'm so grateful to you for having written this poem, these poems, and for reading them this evening. Thank you so much. We'll be talking about them in a little while. For the audience, I'd like next to introduce Natalie Graham. So you need to know that pre-pandemic, I had the good fortune to read poems alongside Dr. Graham at Chevalier's bookstore. The occasion was the debut of Graham's first book of poems, Begin with a Failed Body, and it was a great occasion indeed. I'm not the only one, though, that knows of her talents by far. Natalie is an associate professor of African American Studies at Cal State Fullerton and the current Poet Laureate for Orange County. Please give up your jazz hands for Natalie Graham.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that introduction. I just echo what you said about Lester's poems and his reading. It really is moving and sort of shattering. At the same time, I just was listening and taking it in. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to read alongside of both of you. It's an honor and a privilege to do that. And thank you to Cody and to the city for this opportunity as well. Okay, I'm going to start with a poem that's really it's about the ways that grief is sort of relentless. I think all the poems that I'm reading tonight are sort of about the ways that grief doesn't have boundaries. It kind of flows in and through our lives, and sometimes it's personal grief layered on top of like the social grief that we're traveling through together. And so I'm going to start with a poem called Terrible Tambourines, and it starts with an epigraph by Nate Marshall, and it's a line from his poem Out South. Shake us, we make terrible tambourines. When the hurting comes, don't worry about it. Hurt, fickle. Part of the dying is finding a new name for everything gonna be all right. A different song for the hills. Lovely, shake terror. I got a feeling. I feel a brother shake while they sing it. Someone is squalling, amen, amen, amen. There were drums at the funeral. They made us clap. We had to eat. There were babies who didn't know to cry and they smiled up at us. There was a time we were beaten, lovely. When she beat us brave. Beat us so the police don't. But mama, they do. They still shake, terrible, crack an awful sound, bang on bodies, bodies drums, no melody on the piano, just pling, pling, pling. These terrible tambourines, shake a bam, shake a bam, 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 bam. Next poem is called Last Supper. The wallet-sized black and white photo is too washed out to see the details of Da Vinci's Last Supper hanging in the shadows behind my mother and grandparents. Outlines of the figures Bartholomew, James, and Andrew hover over my mother's right shoulder. Matthew, Thaddeus, and Simon argue over her left. Past my grandfather's cracked fingers, Judas could hold a suggestive knife and Mary might be disguised as a different saint, but there's no telling. Jesus's blessed head, full of clattering rants and ribbons of doubt, tilted, eyes closed, mouth gapped, all but ready to yield, is completely hidden behind my mother. When my mother dies, vain repetitions accumulate, become incoherent. Some of the doors in my head swing and creak, won't shut. Jesus pitied the mad, scattered their demons seaward like a loved one's remains. I marvel for hours at her brown face shining in the photo, a halo of light in the corner, strands of pearls looped twice around her delicate throat. What I'm trying to say is grief. The shuddering of its bells can kill you. So if every pyramid of Egypt makes sense, and if Nefertiti was the Jesus returned and that's why her tomb is gone, well, yes, take whatever you can hold. My grandmother didn't smile with her teeth. People I love keep gold in their mouths and ask, what are you smiling about? The next poem is called The Watcher, Visiting Hours. The prison rises from slanted ground, from a loose slat in the earth. At first sight, through the heat, seems blowable, lucent. We wait for your brother. I tell you about the watcher's eye, his knowing, his quick flickering, the lights he carries. You say he sounds like a devil. The whole landscape is machine. Hammers its own doors open and shut. From the lot, we see the beast of sliding gates and mechanized arms and glass eyes capturing. We wait for your brother's hours to start. You draw your thumbs beneath the tired arch of a slight foot. We laugh, call it a sliver, scrap, compare it to other tiny things. The prison rises from broken stitches and being nothing but stone, performs the everyday magic of exhalation, alive with whistling smoke and grinding shadow. My stomach is swollen with a boy the size of an orange. I say, think of what an orange can be, not just food, but the seed inside a seed, like God, a grove, creation. Rot too. You say it can rot too, an orange. Rot is always gathering in its patches. The last poem I'll read is called Touching the Bird. I think this poem is in many ways about the ways that mothers and parents and love people who love others try to protect them from things like death, and the way that that protection is not possible. And I think particularly the way that stories of death touch Black boys. And that's what this is about. It's called Touching the Bird. A panicked boy calls me over to kneel with him, grabbing the air in his fist, twirling his fist in the air, punch, 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 then his mouth open, silent. The question he asks me is a bloody tooth and a brown napkin. This is the first day's brightening. Clouds swept off toward the river, the boy prickled with grit, our shadows thrown over the dead magic of a half-crushed hummingbird, wilted, silent. A tuft of a straw wrapper stuck under its tiny bird head, tuft fluttering, feathers fluttering, its dead bird eye wedged out by some skittering insect, its dark insides open to the air, legs crumbles of brown straw, the iridescent shimmer of its waving body scuffed murky blue. I roll the cracked bird into the stiff curl of a magnolia leaf. It flops into the miniature canoe like a stuffed toy. You can't pray for a dead bird to fly. You can't even touch it with your fingers. The boy knows. The boy knows how death oils itself into the skin, knows we're covered with holes, minutes away from drowning or being smashed under a wheel. He knows a boy can't touch a dead thing without its soft little death touching him back. Thank you so much.
Oh, Natalie, that so moving, so stirring. Hard not to well up a little bit, particularly at that last one. Bam, 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 indeed. So thank you. I think I'm going to turn to Cody now.
Lynn, Lester, and Natalie, those were beautiful and harsh, and I'm so grateful that you chose to share those with us tonight. I'm going to do the business stuff right now real quick before we get back into discussion with our poet. I do want to thank the City of West Hollywood for making the WeHo Reads series possible and providing resources, and for trusting Bookswell to produce the series. I also have kind of fun and great announcements to make about other partners who have come on board for this series. Additional support is provided by the UCLA Extension Writers Program. I know many of the people who are watching tonight have either taught for or attended those classes. So it's great to see different community support coming through. This event in particular is also supported in part by the Poets and Writers mini grant program. So thank you to Poets and Writers. We've been lucky to have some media partners also helping us get the word out. Book Soup is one, of course, in West Hollywood that provides a valuable service. If you go to the link that I will drop in the chat, you can see and shop the books by our poets tonight and also throughout the entire series. And we're very grateful that bookshop.org has helped us to promote the series, as well as the Los Angeles Review of Books. So, I mean, for me, I think the most important thing is that we are all coming together as a community in support of making spaces for poets to be heard. And again, thank you to the City of West Hollywood. I am going to turn it over briefly to Mike J, who's the arts coordinator at the city. Thank you, Mike, for everything and making this possible.
Thank you, Cody. You've done a great job producing the series for the city of West Hollywood. And of course, thank you to all 4 of our poets tonight. Your words are so moving, and it really does demonstrate the importance of art and how that can move us. And of course, congratulations to Lynn and to Natalie on being Poet Laureates. It's great to have 2 of our local Poet Laureates from Southern California here. This is produced by, this is a presentation of the City of West Hollywood. So of course, the funding for that is because our elected officials, our 5 city council members, are extremely supportive of the arts. And we're very lucky to have one of our council members here today who wanted to say a quick hello to everybody. So without further ado, here is Councilmember John Erickson.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you so much to Cody, Mara, Lynn, Natalie, and Lester. And as a personal privilege, Lester, my dear friend Ellen Greenstone, was talking to me about you today, and she said you are brilliant. And from what I have heard, just most recently being on this event, along with the other brilliance of the panelists, is that that was not an adequate word to describe the sheer exhilaration and feelings that your poetry has elicited in me. So I want to thank you, as well as all the other panelists, for giving me the feels and for giving us all a moment today, and one that I think we will nourish and chew on as we move forward in this month. And it's so appreciative of the work that you do, the joy and the grace that you bring to this city right now by bringing your brilliance here. But more importantly, the way that the arts bring us together to heal, to move forward, and to look to the future for all that we hold dear while still remembering the past. Thank you, each of you. It's a joy to serve the city in this way, but to come here and speak to you, this is what we love to do the most, because ultimately it's to say thank you to the brilliance that you bring to our city with what you're offering. So with that, I'll bid you all adieu, and thank you very much. And I wish you the most successful event, and thank you again for all that you do. All right, bye everyone.
Thank you, John. And it is my pleasure now to turn the show back over to Lynn, because my favorite part of any poetry reading is to hear the poets talk about their work and to be in conversation. So I will fade back. Lynn, it's up to you.
Thank you so much, Cody, and thank you, Councilman, for your kind words. I'm glad, actually, we had a few minutes to take a breath before going to the questions, because Lester and Natalie, the poems that you read were so moving, were so necessary, speak to so many issues that are crucial, not just for the African American community, even though this is a month when we particularly celebrate, although we celebrate all year, I might say, but because there's so many issues that we're still dealing with. So I wanted to start first with you, Lester, and ask what I suspect you're gonna get asked over and over about your new book, and that is whether or not you had an idea that you wanted to write about lynching, or whether the photographs, you saw the photographs and thought from there, I need to write about this. How did that come about?
The latter.
Okay.
I saw the photographs, and it welled up so much in me: horror, anger, fear. I mean, really, I think a lot of Black men, if not most Black men, have the thought, that could be me.
Yes.
That could have been me. It could be a pickup driving down the street, and the next thing you know, a rope is coming out the passenger window, and you're being dragged. I mean, it's happened.
You're right.
So there was that, and then there was, well, how am I going to deal with this? And the way for me to deal with it was to write with the understanding that there was an audience that should hear what it is. You know, sometimes you're right, you say, no one knows this. But then the other times that you write, you say, well, if they don't want it, they should.
Exactly.
So that's how it came.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea, and you mentioned this in one of the poems that you read tonight, about the fact that these were postcards. I mean, the lynchings are bad enough in and of themselves, but the idea that people would mail these postcards like, I'm on vacation in Hawaii. Oh yeah, we just went to this lynching is so shocking.
Right. Wish you were here.
Yeah, wish you were here. Oh, you should have been here. We had such a good time. Took the kids, took the children. And it just strikes me as we've heard in some political corners these days that the children, they're so sensitive that, their feelings are going to get hurt and all of that sort of thing. I'm thinking, so maybe you're not aware that families went to this. I wanted to ask you too about your My Father Was a Poet poems, because my father was a closet poet. So I really appreciated the preamble that you gave. Could you talk about the context of those poems and how they do or do not relate to the concept of resilience as you think of it?
Well, I had a difficult father. And to survive and to survive well, you had to be resilient. And this particular book, these father and son poems, good poetry is a good lie. And my father was blind, but he was not a poet. But I wrote those poems for him the way I thought he would write them.
He would have written
them. That put me in a space to be able to have this posthumous conversation with him in a way of moving from a point where I refused to go to his funeral, right, to a point where, as in the last poem, I forgave him and accepted myself.
Yeah, and therein lies the resilience. That's fantastic. Natalie, I wanted to turn to you and something you said, and I wrote it down. I had other questions, but when you talked about the boundlessness of grief, I had a question in my mind about that leading to a kind of resilience. You said, we had to eat. She beat us to be brave. I mean, talk about those horrors in some way or difficulties and how that builds resilience, particularly when it comes to creativity.
I think so much of, so much of my upbringing is just like, trauma alongside joy. Like, and I'm just so used to a life that's complex and that there's like this unrelenting, complexity of life. And part of that is like, being born and raised in the South, Black in America, and having a mother who was born and raised in the deeper South, and so this idea that like, you still have to get up. You have to get up. What are you going to do?
Exactly.
That sort of idea of like, if you, there's something in you that's stronger than this pain.
Right.
There's something in you that is enduring and that has, goes back, it's ancestral lineage,
right,
that sort of power. And so I think, I think that there's a way of just enduring that I, have a very sort of old understanding of from my parents, like what it means.
Well, and that's what
endure.
It struck me about the first poem you wrote, The Terrible Tambourines, the juxtaposition of music, which we would think of as a positive thing and a joyous thing. And when you juxtapose that with terrible, you had me like at the title, because that's what we're talking about, I think, or what you were talking about. In all of these poems, even from the son having to understand about death, which most of us would try to keep our youngsters from knowing that as long as possible. And for African Americans, it's not possible to keep it from them. So.
Exactly.
Well, Cody, I don't think you were going to introduce me. I'm not sure it's necessary. There's anybody who wants to go to the website can find a lot of blah, blah, blah about me. So perhaps I will just jump into my poems, if that's okay. I'm not hearing any
Absolutely.
not hearing objections, so I'm going to do it. So I just have 3 pieces. This first one concerns the 1619 project, which I am have a major passion about. As you'll hear in this piece. For those of you, I think most of you will be familiar with it, but for those of you who aren't, I hope after I read this that you'll be curious to learn more about it. And it's actually less of a poem than maybe a hybrid piece. Cotton versus the 1619 Project. 1. The 1619 Project is an initiative that aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. New York Times, August 2019. Because as long as you're south of the Canadian border, you're in the South. Malcolm X. 2. In 2011, Arkansas's Republican Senator Tom Cotton's website read in part, Washington, D.C. should not dictate choices to either parents or local school systems. Federal education policy should encourage communities to develop their own standards. Choice, competition, and freedom will provide needed reforms. And 3, we have to study the history of slavery and its role and impact on the development of our country, because otherwise we can't understand our country. As the Founding Fathers said, it was the necessary evil upon which the Union was built. Tom Cotton, July 2020. But 4. On July 23, 2020, Cotton introduced legislation which reads in part, the 1619 Project is a racially divisive and revisionist account of history that threatens the integrity of the Union by denying the true principles on which it was founded. The federal government has a strong interest in promoting an accurate account of the nation's history. No federal fund shall be used by any elementary school or secondary school to teach the 1619 initiative or to support the teaching of the project in the public schools. 5. Cotton prefers not to teach children about the evils that built the Union, the Middle Passage, dehydration, dysentery, scurvy, profitability, the ballast block, the branding iron, the antelope, 283 Africans aboard, the Creole, 128 Africans aboard, the Guerrero, 561 Africans aboard, the Isabella, 150 Africans aboard, the, too innumerable to name. A 15% mortality rate, except those who boarded the Zong, where 130 Africans were killed before landfall. And then the burning of Rosewood, the Elaine massacre, the bombing of Tulsa, and 6, incidents of lynching, an extra-legal form of group violence, were prevalent in the early 20th century. One scholar estimated that during its peak in Arkansas, at least 318 documented lynchings occurred, 231 victims of which were Black. Perhaps Arkansas's most notorious lynching is that of John Carter, accused of assaulting a local white woman and her daughter. He was found, eventually hanged from a telephone pole and shot. Later, his body was set ablaze and dragged through the streets of Little Rock to the corner of 9th and Broadway, the heart of the city's Black community. Encyclopedia of Arkansas. And 7, Southern trees, blood on leaves, blood at the root, bulging eyes, twisted mouths. 8, John Wadlington was lynched for being a Republican, 1872, and George Bullitt was lynched after being accused of outrageous conduct toward a white family, 1878, and Mrs. Turner Graham was lynched for an unknown cause or accusation, 1885, and much, much later, Tamir Rice and Walter Scott and Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and then again, and 9. In the early 20th century, my daddy emigrated to America from a sugar plantation, Lesser Antilles, West Indies, despite the rebellions, the Atlanta massacre of 1906, blacks hung from lampposts, shot, beaten, stabbed, the Johnson-Jeffries riot set off because Jack Johnson defeated a great white hope, the Chester riot, incited by whites opposed to the Great Migration post-World War I. But my daddy came anyway. In the mid-20th century, my brothers, aged 15 and 17, left Los Angeles on a Greyhound bus headed for New York City. And when they'd eaten all the sandwiches mother could prepare, they had to rely on a fearless Black floor sweeper to pass them scraps of day-old bread from the back door of a whites-only restaurant. In 1968, year of Dr. King's assassination, my then 3-year-old niece, washing her hands at her preschool's communal sink, was asked by a little white boy, "Is your butt black too?" 10. But did you know Lewis Latimer invented the carbon filament component of the light bulb? And did you know Charles Drew invented bloodmobiles in the years when blood donations were segregated by race? Or did you know Mary Davidson, disabled, multiple sclerosis, invented toilet tissue holders? Did you know? Do you know now? Do you? No? Then 11. If you want to fly, you got to give up the shit that weighs you down. Toni Morrison. This poem was inspired by a book that I read, Blood on the River, about a mutiny in the area that we now call Guyana. A rage on Berbice, 1763. Before I was north and south of a new country, I was divided from. I was a tactic. I was a slave trading port. Before I was remade as Amerindian, I was sugar as the main crop. Before I was overworked and underfed, I was selected for immediate punishment, persuaded to remain a wooden gutter for collecting rainwater, ruled by terror and customary understandings before I was replenished by the arrival of 2 more ships. Before I was left for dead by frightened Europeans was before I was something black at the bottom of a buyer's cup. Before I was high upriver in the jungle, I was gold and silver and a bounty paid to soldiers, prepared fields farther inland, the quarters where we captives slept. I was the fort burned and abandoned before I joined the Arawaks and squatted with a knife in my hand. Before I was traumatized woman hoping to make my way, I was the turning of the tide. Before I was awakened in the middle of the night, I was bloodshed on the captain's bedclothes. Before I escaped the cooking pot full of Negro flesh, before I declined to implicate the others, before I was a witness to the execution of the women rebels and sentenced to vigilante justice, I was a daughter who spelled you my name phonetically. I was woman with child, whose children's children have lived to tell you this. And I'll close with this one. It has a short epigraph. Some of you may know this song, Dance Me Very Tenderly and Dance Me Very Long. The poem's entitled Song for Africa. Leonard Cohen never knew he started. Long as the river Mononara, long as the miles between the Malagasy and the bondsmen of Kentucky, long as memory, long as the concussions of kidnap, long as every equation plotting the distance between Earth and its backlash, between sun and the bursting of hyacinth, daffodil, mustard seed, seed most fruitless, carried across the sea, perhaps, from Benin, once misprized as French Dahomey, and before that, when the land was confused with the dynasty of the Edo, its people most majestic, most black and black and black, and the people are movement. See how they excite here and here. Secrets in our gardens, stunning among the periwinkle, creeping myrtle, Confederate jasmine, florodora in spring and in summer, when they are most Stephanatus floribunda, curling around and over and under. And did you ever see such movement, long as the river Mononara, long as the miles between us and the Malagasy? Oh, boogaraboo, dance me very tenderly and dance me very long. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn it to you, Cody.
Fantastic, Lynn. Thank you so much. The seeds are still in my head that you just listed. Thinking of things growing and things percolating. I've just put in the chat the link to Lynn on Twitter, where you can find her, and I find her presence there one of the reasons I deal with that nightmare platform still. So we do have a question, and it comes in from Peter J. Harris, who was one of our poets for the first event in the series. And I know Peter through the LA Institute for the Humanities, and I know that his questions are both sharp and deeper than they seem, and also interesting. So I'm just going to read out what he's got, because he did it right the first time. He says, please discuss the balance and importance of craft when writing about challenging and triggering personal and social themes.
Gee, Peter, why didn't you ask us something easy? I'm going to turn, since I'm the moderator, I'm going to turn to my co-readers, Natalie and Lester, and ask them if they'd like to take that on.
Well, first off, hello, Peter. Glad you're out there. I missed your radio show, because I loved reading to the music that you were putting down. It's really a memorable experience. But to come to your question, I could look at it in both books. Let me just look at it from the most recent book. And let's look at the lynching poems. They are all formal poems. You wouldn't know it just listening to it unless you knew what the form was. But I created a form about 7 years ago. It's called the Lennon Lyric. It's an 18-line poem, 3 6-line stanzas, and the first word and last word of the line are the same. And it works its way down the poem until you get to the end of the first stanza, where the first word and the last word are similar. Then it picks it back up in the second stanza. Again, you get to the 12th line. The first word and the last word are similar. And then in the third stanza, it's all the first word and the last word are the same. So that's the Lennon Lyric. And I was able to use that form to deal with the emotions, to deal with the intelligence I was gathering, and find a way in which to shape it and then send it out into the world. So yes, form can help, and it certainly, I believe, helped me.
Thank you for that response. That's very helpful and useful. What about you, Natalie?
I think there's two things that I feel like I've seen a lot in poems that feel heavier. I think that one is just the repetition. Like, I think there's some like consistent repetition of like language and particular words that I hold on to. The other thing I do a lot of is like kind of found poetry, like looking at like entering a historical moment through a newspaper article or through a ship captain. Like I have a poem about the Zong massacre, and it takes like the ship doctor's account, and it uses that account as if it's the only dictionary I have access to. And so I wrote a poem from that language. And I think there's a way that it just allows me to enter the space in a different way. But yeah, I think form is a way to take a step away from the content for me in a lot of ways, because it can be heavy. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'll talk a little bit about my Cotton versus the 1619 project. I'm beyond seething about the way people are discussing this project as an inappropriate way to teach history to children of all ages and adults. And what I found in that was I felt it was too big to actually be a poem. So when you see it on the page, it's laid out like no poem I've ever written. It doesn't have the usual lineation. Part of it is very prosaic, as you could hear when I was reading it. So I think one of the things to do when you're dealing with difficult subject matter, and all three of us, I think, have done that this evening, is to kind of get out of the way of some of the usual ways you would think about approaching the work and allow yourself to let the material kind of push you in the direction that is going to best reflect what the poem, not the poet, but what the poem is trying to convey. And that might not be a traditional poem, or it might be the Lennon lyric. I think all of us are saying in different ways that, yes, we know this is difficult and often triggering material that we're dealing with, but the best thing we can do for that material, I think, as creative beings, is to let that material find, you're a vessel through which that material is being filtered to be conveyed to the rest of the world. So I hope that helps, Peter. Thank you so much for asking. You're always on top of it.
If I could add just a little bit more, 2 points. First, when I read your first poem, and I see it as a poem, it looked like a charging indictment. And in that, I found it to be very effective. And
that's a lawyer in me coming out.
Yes, well, okay, I got that. And I also, there's a way in which form can give you space to look at what you're doing, but it also allows you to go even deeper in and possibly see something or some things that you hadn't seen before, and you wouldn't have necessarily allowed yourself to see unless you had a framework from which to go in and see.
Thank you for that. Cody?
Yeah, well, we have some time a little bit later in the program for extended discussion. So I think that we'll come back to this question around how not to be overwhelmed by the history and the content as you're working with it in your poems. If we can transition now, I really want to introduce Camari Carter Hawkins, because we're going to do some writing prompts here. And I think I first met Camari through the Los Angeles Review of Books publishing workshop. And then she performed at the Bookswell Juneteenth event in 2020 alongside Ashaki Jackson and F. Douglas Brown and Natasha Deon and Bridget Bianca, and that was amazing. And so I love her poems, and ever since I've been following her online and seeing her be this force of creativity. And I'm not really doing it justice, but she is constantly finding ways to inspire an audience to write themselves and write their poems. And it's just been inspiring to watch. So I wanted to ask her here tonight to bring some of that to us. And I think, Camari, if you have some writing prompts you want to share with us that have been developed based on some of the poems or poets that we've heard from.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Cody. I am so excited to be sharing space with you all tonight. As noted, I do have some writing prompts, so let's write together. Please break out your poems, your journals, your notebooks, and a pen. And we're just going to write for the next couple of minutes here. And each prompt will be inspired by a quote from our lovely poets from tonight. So just a little bit of fun facts about journaling, because I am a nerd like that. 5 fast facts. Number 1, it strengthens your immune system. According to the American Psychological Association, writing can help boost your immune system. Did you know that? Though venting into a journal isn't enough, the research suggests people who use writing to better understand their emotions get the most benefit. Writing gives structure to anxious feelings and help you get past them. Number 2, it supports stress management by reducing stress and anxiety. 3, it helps you to sleep better, especially when you journal before bed. Get all those feelings out, put it all down on the paper, pick it up in the morning, but it'll help you go to sleep much better if you journal. And 4, it helps to improve your memory. When you write by hand, it stimulates a collection of cells called reticular activating system. Your mind then puts whatever you're focusing on at the forefront and processes it at a deeper level. The physical act of writing brings information center stage and lets your brain know it should pay close attention. So I am pro pen and paper. 5, it helps you solve problems and boost creativity, which is my favorite. Writing about your emotions helps you become self-aware, and it lets you process what you're going through and work past high emotions to look at situations more objectively. So it definitely helps you solve problems. So let's start with our first. Oh, just a guideline before we begin. One of my favorite quotes that I love to say myself is move so fast towards your dreams so there is no room to doubt yourself. How that applies today is I want you to just write. I want you, don't think about if this sounds weird or whatever. I don't even care. Just stop all the mind drama. Just write quick and leave no room for doubt or overthinking. I want you to focus just on the release. So our first prompt is a quote by Lynne Thompson, and the quote says, "It's people most majestic, most black and black and black, and the people are movement." So I want you to write for 2 minutes here. How are you movement? Start beginning now, and I'm going to play just some soft rain music, and then I'll stop you at the 2-minute mark. Probably like a minute and 30 seconds. All right. And you can pause here. You can always come back to this prompt later on in your writing time at home. So we're going to move on to our next prompt here, which is from Lester Lennon, as you've heard tonight as well. The quote is, "I did not know I heard the future summoned." So your writing prompt here is, what is the future summoning? Your future, the future, a future summoning. I'll play some soft music here just for 2 minutes and begin. All right, we're going to pause here. I hope you're getting some good writing in. Remember to just don't overthink it, just jump right in. And our last prompt for the night is by Natalie Graham. This quote says, "Part of the dying is finding a new name for everything, gonna be all right." So I want you to write on this, find a new name for resistance, wherever that takes you, and begin. Sorry about that. Okay. we're going to pause there. And so I have, for those that are actually watching live in the chat, I'm actually sharing with you some extra writing prompts, the extended version where you get to explore more prompts. So they are in the chat for you. And please enjoy them. Spend some time this week journaling. I hope that you all make it a practice where you journal. I do morning pages, 3 pages each morning, and then you can journal before bed. It really helps to reconnect with yourself. It really helps to get that stress off. And if you review it, you get to see what's going on in your mind and help you with that problem solving and boosting the creativity. So that is all that I have to share. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope you all are well.
Thank you so much, Carmen. That was so terrific. I mean, I feel like those people whose name becomes a verb or a noun or something to have, lines from my poems and from Lester's and from Natalie's taken as and used as prompts. So thank you so much for doing that. Cody, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in here. I know we wanted to have a little bit more discussion before winding up this evening. I know that there's one question in our Q&A box, but maybe you have some as well from the YouTube live, which I don't have access to.
Yeah, we have one come through there that was queued up. So let's start there, and then we can head into the one that came through the Q&A. The question's from Alex Sam, who asks all the poets, how do you not become overwhelmed by the history of such atrocities while you're creating these works to help the reader or audience learn about these subjects that aren't taught?
Natalie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that for me, a lot of what I'm when I write about difficult past, present ideas, it's to get something out. So it's already in me, the weight is already there, and the writing gets it off me, where I think it's really, I think a lot of the writing is personal. Like I read something, I come across it, and it stops me, and I have to write it out to move forward.
How about you, Lester?
Well, the writing is maybe the first way of dealing with it, but there's more to life than writing. Mm-hmm. And I have a wife and a daughter, and attention must be given there, mm-hmm. Whether they want it or not. And I have a job. I'm an investment banker, and so you got to step out and step in another place, and mm-hmm. and then there's always fantasy football. You're always looking for a good tight end. So there are other things that you can do, you need to do. And I spend a lot of time on a particular war game, and you don't want to get blown up. So you have to pay attention, and that will take your mind away to other places.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, Lester, because, and thank you for your question, Alex. It's a good one, and I think one that we've all faced, certainly the three of us and other writers that I know. I guess I am at a point in my life that, if it's overwhelming, I just let it overwhelm me for a while. It is what it is, and some of it is very heavy and overwhelming and shocking as Lester's writing about these postcards. I think I learned about that maybe in the last 10 years ago. Certainly knew about the lynchings, but I didn't know that there were these postcards. And that's pretty overwhelming to deal with. And I kind of let myself live in that overwhelmedness for a while, because I worry a little bit that if I'm not overwhelmed from it, I become so hardened to it that I'm forgetting. And I have a very large family with a lot of kids, and I worry about what they're being taught and not being taught. Even before the 1619 project, they're always saying things like, Auntie Lynn's going to ask us about geography. Yes, that is correct. I'm going to ask you about geography.
Right.
So it's important for me. I write a lot of personal history, but I also write a lot of public history. And it's important for me to leave those breadcrumbs, not just for my family, but anybody who feels like reading these pieces are going to find little bits of that history strewn throughout, especially the history that isn't told. That's why I was so moved by Lester's poem where he talked about the unknowns. So many of the people that he's referring to, some of them we know the names, but many, 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 we do not know the names. So I think for me, I live in that overwhelmedness until I'm driven to either my piece of paper, Carmen. Sometimes it's a piece of paper, sometimes I go straight to the laptop, but I don't shy away from that overwhelmedness because I didn't have to live through much of it. Other people, before our ancestors, lived through it, and that is why we are as resilient as we are today, I believe. So that's I think this is an interesting, because I suspect that all three of us have dealt with it in the way all three of us have described from time to time.
And you also have to be, no, not you, I have to be careful not to get too far into it, and then all you have is fear and rage, and what you're doing then is acting from that. I remember I went to Mississippi in the late 60s to help register Black folks to vote. And I'm from New Rochelle, New York. And we remember Cheney, Goodwin, and Schwerner. In 1963, Schwerner's mother was my science teacher in high school. In 1964, he was lynched. And when I went to Mississippi, the first thing I did when I got off the bus was to go to the gun store, get a gun, and the next thing I did was to walk out in the middle of the street in Jackson, Mississippi, and dare a car to hit me. Well, I'm lucky to be alive. So you can't live your life that way, giving those kinds of false challenges. So you need to find a way of bringing that back in and sending it out in a more healing way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cody?
I have another question that's come through in the Q&A. I have a question, but I'm going to save that till the end.
Okay. Yes, I see it from Elena.
There you go.
Hi, Elena. Glad you're here. Your question is, how do you foresee the ignited role of poetry in our current social and cultural realms? So maybe I'll start that, since I've been picking on my co-readers to start before me. You know, people are non-poets, are non-poetry readers are prone on occasion to say, you know, what difference does poetry make? You know, what does it really do for anyone? And my response is always the same. You think you don't want poetry in your life, but if someone dies, gets married, has a baby, graduates, or anything in between, who do they go to? Not the fiction writers, they call the poets, because they don't have the language that is needed to encapsulate. That's why Amanda Gorman was such a success at the inauguration, because she found the language to address issues that people were concerned about. So I think that even if one person is moved by any of the things that we write, and we're all writing in this era where social justice, it's not that it wasn't important in the past, but it is of increasing focus these days. And so I think that poetry can move people when they're looking at this mirror, really, of who they are and what is this world that they're living in, and the poets shine a light on that. So that's my little diatribe about that. Natalie, what say you?
I think there's something, part of the function of poetry among all of its many functions, I think, is to slow us. And we go so fast that it's hard to capture what's happening right now. And so that feels really vital to kind of meditate on a moment. Or like, even with tragedy, it's so easy to get in this like loop of trauma, this sort of loop of, we're in this emotional loop of one thing and then the next person and the next thing and the next thing. I remember like this accumulation of trauma and tragedy in the last couple of years. And I think poetry gives us a license to take a moment and say, this moment is really important. This second, this time together, with each other. And I think poetry is a slowing that, even in its form, sort of requires that we slow a bit, depending on, what the form is. So I think that that's also part of what we need, collectively.
Lester.
Well, I feel an increase in the energy coming out of poetry, an increase in the interest in poetry. Amanda Gorman, in a way, is a manifestation of that. I mean, Joe Biden wanted to have an inaugural poet.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump didn't. Barack Obama did. I mean, that's what we have. And there's so many bad things about COVID, but I'm telling you, people come into these interior spaces, and what can help them is poetry. Mm-hmm. Maybe they are journaling. Well, what is a better rough draft for poetry than a journal? It's a way of getting into yourself in a creative way, because you can't go outside. Yeah. So you're going to go inside and in some ways deal with things you might not have dealt with, and deal with them in ways you might not have dealt with. And poetry is one of those ways, both in the writing and the reading, and looking for more of it.
Thank you. That's a profound answer from both of you. Cody, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, we're coming up towards the end, but I did want to ask before we go. During the first event in the series, we heard a lot about witnessing and reflecting as a way of processing trauma and healing. And I'm wondering, tonight we've talked a lot about history in a very similar way. And I'm wondering if there's a piece of this, or in your craft, where you look forward to the world that you want to create, and do you call that into being at all through your poems, and just what that kind of hopeful aspect looks like to you?
I can start. I recently wrote a poem at an invitation about the work of an artist. And I didn't focus on any one particular work. This is a Japanese artist, Japanese American artist. And, but rather kind of focused on the feeling that I got from it. And it turned out to be a prayer. And I think all of us find, as writers, I'll of course, ask Lester and Natalie to respond for themselves, of course, but I think someone said earlier about the heaviness in what we're dealing with. And I think we do also want to shine a light on history, but at the same time, find ways and opportunities and subject matters where we can say, this is a hopeful piece. This is what we wish for our planet, et cetera, so that we can not always be mired down, because it is pretty heavy duty. And if we don't have any hope, then we really are doomed. And it's a struggle these days, with everything that the planet has been through, from the climate to the COVID to the politics to the, I don't know what Mr. Putin did this evening while we were doing this, but you know, there's a lot going on. So we have to stay hopeful. There are 2 new babies in my family and 1 on the way. And I want them to have as much joy as they can have for as long as they can have it. So I think that's something we have to actively set out to do, and need to balance the tough things that we look at and shine a light on with our joy and hope for the future.
Mhm.
Lester?
Well, I have 2 poets I think can help answer that question. I was reading some Jean Toomer earlier today, and there's a quote, 2 sentences I just like to read about what he said about life and life's search. And I said, damn, that kind of like fits right here. So what he says in his search, again, we find just enough to enable us to carry on. I now doubt that any of us will completely find and be found in this life. So I think about that. I think about the victims of terror, the victims of lynching. Some we've found, some we haven't. And even those that we have found, there is more to be found about them. And then finally, in terms of what do I want to see in the world, I'm going to go back to Lucille Clifton. And I was in a workshop with her, and I used some bad language. She didn't like it. We had a little disagreement, but she said something that I'll never forget. She said, in your poetry, do not add to the chaos. And so that's what I want to do in moving forward. I do not want to add to the chaos.
Beautifully said. Beautiful. Natalie?
You know, that I wrote this line while Lester was reading, and I wrote, there's power in telling the awful truth. And there's some way that like you say it and then somebody comes alongside of you and says, never again. And we're going to be together in that never again. We're going to be together in that. And that's like imagination. That's like creating a world. We're saying together, you know, never again. And we're walking together. And so I think that that's something like that also is a creative practice, right? It's like this embodied creative response to terrible things, right? So
well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking it's a corollary of John Lewis's Good Trouble. You know, you bring both of those things to the table and somehow they work together to a positive outcome. So Cody, I can see that we're coming up on time, so I want to give you time to introduce the next program, and on behalf of my fellow readers and Carmen with her, Camari with her, I keep calling you Carmen, Camari with her fabulous prompts. Thank you so much for inviting us and letting us have a little space to discuss these issues tonight.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Lester. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Camari. This has been wonderful. And I'm just so pleased with how it went, and to hear you, and so many more people are going to hear you in the recording later on. Follow-up stuff. Camari, thank you for the prompts. If anyone who has journaled would like to share that with the Bookswell audience, you can email me, contact@bookswell.club. I'm happy to compile those and create a compendium of our community's journaling in response to the poets you heard tonight. Yeah, look for that from us. Let me show you the next program. But before I do that, just thank you again, Lynn, Lester, Natalie, and Camari. It's been super. Thank you. Here we go. If I had some cool music, I would play us out, but
need Camari to tighten you up.
There we go. Let me try to get to the end of this real quick. Here we go. Yes. So in March on the 16th, I am so excited to welcome women who submit which is, I mean, it's grown beyond an LA-based organization, but many of the writers who lead that organization and who participate are here in LA and throughout Southern California. Xochitl Julissa Bermejo and Tisha Marie Reichley Aguilera and Noriko Nakata, Hazel Kite Witham Flint, and Thea Puchel will be here. And it's going to be wild. I won't say it's chaotic, but it's going to be wild because they're going to lead us through kind of a collaborative poetry reading and writing session. And that's all I'll say because I don't want to spoil anything. But thank you everyone for being here tonight. This was wonderful. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Night, everyone.
Right.
Go. And let me stop this live stream too.